I'm really delighted to be here today. In fact, somebody asked me a few weeks ago what the red line was that I could weave through my career and who I am as a person. Those earliest experiences of being someone mixed race in multicultural London, not really knowing who I was, sort of knowing I had this German dimension, visiting the Caribbean and seeing family members who lived in very straitened circumstances. One of the things that was impressed upon me from a very early age is the fortune of birth. The luck that I had to be born in a country with free, good quality education at that time, free healthcare still just, and the opportunities that afforded me in comparison to I've got half siblings in the Caribbean who didn't have any of those opportunities. And I think from a very early age, I was motivated to try to contribute what I could to trying to address some of this injustice that I saw. And as I moved through my professional career, I spent many years working for organizations trying to promote relations, good quality relations between diverse religious and ethnic communities, to overcome economic injustice faced by Black and minority ethnic communities in London. What I increasingly began to recognize was that children were at the heart of this, and that if we didn't start young, if we didn't engage children as early as we could in these discussions and considerations, then it'd be very difficult to overcome the systemic challenges that we experience in our societies. And so it was with great pleasure that I sat down at a group, at a table yesterday. We had a group of young people when we were presented with the random questions, and I just happened to be sat at the table with the question, what do adults need to do to listen to children? To listen to children. And actually that's what I've dedicated the last 8 years of my life to thinking about. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you today about. I'm going to talk to you about the work that my organization, Child to Child, does in ensuring that children are listened to and taken seriously. So our fundamental belief is that children can be agents of change, and that with the right support and engagement, they can be really enabled to directly address the issues that are facing them, their peers, and their communities. We're an international agency located at the Institute of Education in University College London, and we are a pioneer of practical approaches to facilitate meaningful children's participation. In fact, this is our 40th year. We were founded by two people who worked extensively in Africa, addressing public health issues, and what they recognized was that a lot of interactions took place informally between children, because in many contexts and settings, children have to look after other children. And they saw that if they could harness those interactions that took place spontaneously between children and equip particularly the older children with knowledge and insights into the issues facing their communities, that this could be a way of engaging children in understanding in a more critical way the challenges that they were experiencing and supporting them to think about how those challenges might be overcome. Our work comprises 3 key areas. We provide resources, training and capacity development of organizations so that they can embed children's participation more effectively in their work. We convene communities of practice. So for example, we run a forum of practitioners working in children's participation in the UK and overseas, because whilst there are quite a lot of us, we often feel quite isolated in this work. Often it's sort of pigeonholed, even within large agencies. So we felt that there was a need to create more of a shared understanding and a network around this. Obviously, we also engage very much in advocacy to mainstream participation. Some of the recent projects we've done, we were commissioned by UNESCO to develop a series of learning resources to promote diversity and inclusion. We're currently working with an organisation in the UK called Ratio that wants to mobilise children in poor local communities to take action on the issues affecting those communities. And over the 40 years, our approaches have spread to more than 70 countries, hence the map. and been translated into more than 35 languages. So it's very rare. I'm very lucky. I get to travel a lot for my job, and it's very rare that I go to somewhere in Africa and I don't suddenly see our child-to-child logo on the side of some school where they've been using our resources and practicing child-to-child approaches for many years, often without our knowledge. And we estimate that more than 1 million children are currently benefiting from child-to-child approaches worldwide. What do we mean by participation? Well, our starting point is Article 12 on the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. States parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters concerning them, the views being given due weight in accordance with age and maturity of the child. So we have it there. Listening to children, giving them an opportunity to play an active role in matters which affect them is a fundamental human right. It's not a gift. It's not something that it's something to which they are fundamentally entitled. But there are other reasons for enabling the meaningful engagement of children. It goes without saying that society should listen to all of its members. We couldn't countenance a situation whereby a cohort of the population, women or other groups within society were disregarded. And where we learn about those examples in other countries, we're rightly horrified. And yet this is what we do often with children. We disregard them. If we listen to children when we're designing services, those services are much more likely to be effective, goes without saying. And in this time of austerity, of little money, if we design services that are effective, they're more likely to be efficient. So typically, there's a value for money argument that can also be made. And in the UK, value for money is a big thing at the moment. So this is something that's often at the forefront of my mind. We've had numerous child protection scandals in the UK in recent years. I don't know how much you've heard about them, but yeah, really terrible systematic grooming and exploitation of children. And what the red thread that links all of these supposedly different experiences has been is the fact that the children who were being targeted and exploited were speaking out. Nobody was listening to them. Even when they went to the police disregarded them. So there is a fundamental need to hear and to respond to what children are saying. Participation enables children to develop fundamental skills for democratic engagement. It enables them to negotiate, to compromise, to work in teams, to listen, to problem solve, to critically engage with ideas. And this builds capacity, competence, and confidence. And it promotes empowerment. Empowerment is an overused word often. We don't really unpack it and think about what it means. So we've done some work trying to really distill what are the component elements of empowerment. What are we talking about? And we've come up with 3 different categories. To begin with, through a process of participation, children become empowered within. They develop a sense of agency, of self-efficacy, a realization of their own dignity and self-worth, and a recognition of their entitlement. This then creates foundations for them to work together with others, to become empowered with, to build partnerships, to work in collaboration, to develop solidarity and addressing key issues, recognizing common strengths and experiences. And this then enables them to become empowered to challenge injustices, violations of their rights, empowered to influence decisions affecting them, for example, policies and legislation. So the concept of empowerment is absolutely fundamental to participation. The issue of who decides and who benefits, the issue of who benefits is closely related to the issue of who decides, who's making the choices on what to focus on. And when children start to make their own decisions about the issues that are affecting them, they start to gain greater control over their own lives, and this is more likely to lead to a sustained enhancement and improvement in their well-being. And there are different models for understanding participation. Many of you will be familiar with Hart's now very famous model, the ladder. At the bottom is the non-participation, manipulation, decoration, and tokenism. And then as we climb the ladder, increasing forms of engagement and meaningful participation. I feel more comfortable with this model because it's non-hierarchical. I don't think Hart intended his model to be hierarchical, but I think when people engage with Hart's ladder, there's a desire to sort of try to climb to the top. And actually, participation is a capacity development exercise for both adults and children, and we all need to be ready to move to the next stage. Because often, more generally, participation starts with adult facilitation and support. So this consultative model, this model which identifies consultative, collaborative and child-led participation, I feel offers a more nuanced understanding. So consultative participation is generally adult-initiated and led, and it's where adults seek to solicit children's views to increase their knowledge and understanding about a given issue, for example, to develop a program. It recognises that children have a valuable contribution to make, might enable them to influence some of the outcomes, but ultimately the control is in the hands of the adults. The collaborative participation is where adults and children work together more in partnership. Again, it's typically adult-initiated, but it does recognise that children need to be more actively involved to identify how to address a given issue or concern. And collaborative participation creates a space for increasingly self-directed action by children over a period of time, which could then lead on to child-led participation. And this is where children are enabled to be self-directive. They're in control. They're coming together to organise their own activities, identifying the issues that concern them. And in this instance, adults serve as facilitators and enablers rather than leaders. Children are controlling the process. And this is why capacity development of both adults and children is needed, because actually it's really difficult for adults to let go of control. You know, most of us were raised ourselves in households where, you know, the authority between parents and children was very clear. Many of us would have experienced education systems that were very didactic, where adults simply determined how education was going to take place. So this is something that we need to learn as adults. We need to learn to trust children, to recognise that they bring expertise and that they are the experts on their own reality. So for participation to be effective and meaningful, I'm presenting here Laura Lundy's conceptual framework. It needs space, voice, influence, and audience. The key for me is this idea that with regards to the audience, we have to listen to and respond. We have to act on what children tell us. And these elements have been elucidated by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. They've provided some additional guidance for ensuring quality and ethical participation, that it must be transparent and informative, so children need child-friendly information. They need to understand what the scope of participation is, what impact their contribution will make. It needs to be voluntary. I recently attended a participatory event in London, and when we asked some of the children why they were there, they'd simply been told they had to go. It sort of defeats the purpose of the initiative. It needs to be respectful. Children should be treated with respect and provided with opportunities to express their views freely and in ways that feel comfortable for them. It must be relevant. Child to Child was involved in a pan-European study commissioned by the European Commission to look at implementation of Article 12 across the 29 member states. And we worked with 12 projects in 5 countries who were engaging a hugely diverse range of children. Looked after children, Roma children, migrants, children with disabilities, children in an early years setting. And one of the key messages to emerge from that process of engagement was that participation made sense when it related to their lives. Children they have a very concrete reality, and so forcing them to engage in issues that might be abstract and completely removed from their daily lives is often completely irrelevant. It needs to be done in a way using appropriate methods with appropriately trained adults. And this is a lot of the work that Child to Child does. I'll talk about one of our programs in a minute. It must be inclusive. We've got to think about who's not there. Who are the marginalised children who are not at the table? Often children with disabilities, often children from black and minority ethnic communities, in some instances girls. And needs to be safe and sensitive to risk, recognising the safeguarding considerations of enabling children to take part. Sometimes participation can expose children to risks and harm. And critically, it must be accountable. If we're going to engage children on issues that affect them, we need to go back to them and tell them what their engagement has, led to, what difference has it made. Child to Child has formulated a methodology to enable children to practically participate in issues which affect them. Our method is called the STEP approach. It's a critical pedagogy in that it creates space for children to reflect critically on those issues which are affecting them in their communities and to think about what they'd like to do in response. It's very Freirean in that sense. And, it can be described really as an action research methodology, which has been made appropriate for children. So in the first instance, children think about a topic that's impacting them in their lives. In recent examples, we've had homelessness, bullying. They find out more about it. So they might organise surveys, focus group discussions. They might go and speak to their peers, their parents, community elders. They come back together to think about what they've learnt and think about how they want to address those issues. If for example, in Sierra Leone, the children that we were working with identified ostracism of orphans as a consequence of the Ebola crisis. And they decided that what they needed to do was to be more proactively reaching out and befriending those children who were extremely stigmatized and also traumatized as a consequence of this terrible exposure to this public health crisis. Children then go out and they actually put into practice the ideas that they've come up with. That might be, they might put on a small performance, or they might make a video. We had some children recently put up a Facebook group, and then they come back together to think about whether or not it was effective. Sometimes the first things they try don't work. So, just as grown-ups, we don't always get things right in the first instance. And in order for the child-to-child STEP approach to work effectively, in order for children to participate in these activities meaningfully, they need to be effectively supported and facilitated by the adults in their lives. We were approached by an initiative called the Child Soldiers Initiative, who have made it their goal to eliminate the use of children as weapons of war. And they approached us in 2012 to develop a series of resources on child soldiers to raise awareness of the issue of child soldiers in the Sierra Leone context, which, as you might recall, had a brutal civil war, which was characterized largely by the use of children who were mobilized around, these militia identities, either ethnically or politically, and deployed to commit atrocities. And so the Child Soldiers Initiative worked with us to develop a series of resources to raise awareness amongst children in Sierra Leone of the push and pull factors, why children had found themselves as child soldiers and what they could do to prevent that happening in the future. So we worked with former child soldiers, again reflecting this idea that children are the experts on their own realities. We worked with former child soldiers to find out what had happened in their lives and what is it that they felt children in this generation needed to know in order not to become child soldiers. So we developed the resources, handed them over to the Child Soldiers Initiative, didn't think too much of it. 2 weeks ago, they were in London. I went to an event, and I heard that they'd set up a whole series of peace clubs across the country in Sierra Leone, where they were using these child soldiers' learning resources to encourage children to think, what does it mean to create a peaceful, just, inclusive, democratic society? There have been elections in Sierra Leone in the last 2 or 3 weeks. In the first wave of elections, the results were inconclusive, and the margin was very, very narrow, so another election was called. And the ruling party, many of the ruling party supporters were really outraged, and some of them went on the rampage and murdered some opposition supporters. Children who'd been participating in the child-to-child peace clubs mobilized and went down to the ballot stations and community spaces, community halls, under the mango tree, wherever it might be, and protested for peace, demanded their right to live in a country characterized by peaceful, free, and fair elections. And so I finish with this story because I think it's important to recognize that children can play an incredibly critical role in creating the societies that we want to live in, and it's incumbent upon us as adults to develop the skills to facilitate and enable children to do that.